This is the new Sigma 200mm f2 DG Sports lens, and these are my three personal favorite telephoto lenses for astrophotography in my collection. In this video, I'm going to see how these three personal favorites stack up against the new Sigma lens on the demanding 61 megapixel full frame Sigma FPL camera. Hello and welcome, my name is Nico Carver, and since this is a review, let me start by saying that this Sigma 200mm f2 lens and the Sigma FPL camera were both sent to me at my request from Sigma America for the purpose of this review. I'll be returning both of them right after this video is published. And the reason I asked Sigma to send me this lens is that it's a fairly unique offering. There have been 200mm f2 lenses for full frame before in the DSLR era, but I believe this is the first one in the mirrorless body era to come out with these specs. And to go from f2.8 to f2 may not sound huge, but it's a full stop, meaning twice as much light. So the lens has to be much bigger, heavier, and more expensive to make that work. And I've noticed before that often these premium telephoto lenses come out and then it takes a very long time, if ever, for us to get a review for astrophotography. But at the same time, telephoto lenses like this Rokinon 135 f2 are incredibly popular in the deep sky astro community. And something that's a bit tricky is that there's no assurance that just because a lens is expensive that it will be good for astrophotography. The kinds of things that astrophotographers care about, like how a lens renders star shapes in the corners of a full frame sensor, maybe doesn't matter too much to a portrait photographer, for example. Sigma does have a very good reputation among astrophotographers, but usually I just get to try and review their wide angle lenses because those are being marketed for Milky Way shooters. So I'm very glad that Sigma gave me this opportunity to review this lens pre-release and compare it to my telephoto lens collection that I already use. Because I'm more of a deep sky astrophotographer, so this is right up my alley. My personal telephoto lens collection is all EF mount, so I did use the Sigma EF to L adapter to test these alongside the Sigma 200mm f2, all on the FPL camera. The new Sigma 200mm f2 will be available for L mount and Sony E mount on launch, and the launch price will be $3,299 US. And in terms of testing, I tested this lens on 5 different nights on a few different mounts to try to get a feel for it for the review. But then on just one night, I did some strict technical comparison testing from my observatory to compare it to these other lenses. And let's jump right in and look at those comparison tests, starting with vignetting. All right, so I'm showing the right edge of each full frame here. Vignetting is obviously shows up as this darkening in the corners and maybe the side. It's basically field illumination, how much of the rectangular field is illuminated by the lens. This is at f2. Here's at f2.8. Here's at f3.2 with each lens. And here's at f4. Any of these lenses, I would definitely use flats to correct this, because if you don't, you can use, of course, background extraction, but background extraction is more for sky gradients and things like that. The vignetting you really want to improve with the flat fielding. So just to show you what flat fielding does, here's an example. So here's the Sigma 200mm f2 with no flats applied, and you can see the center of the field is much brighter and the corners are dark, and then it's sort of a natural fall off. And then here's after we've applied flats, and you can see it's world of difference. There is still some uneven field illumination here with this corner being the brightest, but that's from a sky gradient, and you would correct that with background extraction. Okay, here's now 300% zoomed in center crops at f2. Here at f2, I'd say the Rokinon is a little bit softer than the Sigma 200mm, and the Sigma 105 looks probably the sharpest of the three, but consider that's an f1.4 lens, so we're already stopped down a full stop here to get to this result. At f2.8, the Sigma 105, the Rokinon 135, and the Sigma 200 all look pretty equally matched in sharpness, while the Canon 200, since this is wide open at f2.8, is considerably softer. At f3.2, it's the same story. The Canon still looks a little bit softer than the other three, but by f4, they have equalized, and they are all about equally sharp in the center. Okay, now we're looking at a bright star. It's not the same bright star in each one. I just picked sort of a a representative bright star that wasn't right in the center, was maybe a little bit off center. And this test is useful for seeing any aberrations that will show up, of course, with bright stars. And hopefully you can see that on the Sigma 200 millimeter and the Rokinon 135, it has a very common distortion when a lens is wide open like this, which is what I call the hourglass distortion. It's these two little bites taken out of the bright star. I've also heard this called aperture vignetting. And so it's, like I said, very common with telephoto lenses, and when they're wide open. You would see it on the Sigma 105 if we shot that wide open, but since it's an f1.4 lens, this is stopped down to f2. In this case, you can see whatever side I was taking this from on the 105 is a little bit soft. That's probably just because of some tilt issue. Okay, looking at f2.8, I think we have aperture vignetting on the Canon, but it's also a fairly aberrant result. Wide open, you can see that there's a fair amount of chromatic aberration on some of these medium-sized star, and on the main star, it should be rounder than that, but it's like a little bit weirdly shaped. So it's hard to tell exactly what's going on there. The other three look pretty similar at f2.8. Again, the Sigma 105 maybe has a little bit of a tilt issue going on. Okay, and then at f3.2, so this is just barely stopped down on the Canon 200 millimeter, you can see that the diffraction spikes on the Canon 200 millimeter are very distinctive and very sharp, while on the other lenses, they are much softer. And I prefer that much softer look to the stopped down lens. This comes from the aperture blades when you're stopping down internally with an iris. And I guess the blades on the Canon 200 millimeter, by the nature of them, create this very distinctive sharp lines, while these ones are softer and there's more of them. So I think there's more aperture blades. And that continues when we stop down to f4. You can see the Sigma 105, we're starting to see some more distinctive lines. And the Canon gets very distinctive at f4 with 8 very sharp diffraction spikes. Well, the Sigma 200 f2 and the Rokinon 135 f2 at f4 are my favorites, with a nice sort of soft star profile. Okay, and then finally, corner crops. So these are the extreme corners on a full frame high megapixel sensor. And the Rokinon 135 does pretty well, especially considering the price of that lens. But you can see the stars have some elongation, and they sort of look like little comets. The Sigma 105, they have a lot of coma and chromatic aberration, and so they look sort of soft comets, while these are more sharp comets. And the Sigma 200 millimeter f2, the one I'm reviewing for this video, by far looks the best. They're a little bit out of round, but they're much sharper than these other two, with much less elongation, so less distortion. And I think that's a very impressive result, especially considering this high megapixel sensor. And this is also very, very zoomed in at a 400% zoom. Okay, and then stopped down one stop to f2.8, the Sigma 200 millimeter. Those look really good. I mean, they're just now a slightly elongated left to right, but very sharp. And the Rokinon, I guess I bumped the mount or something because we're getting slightly different star field here, so it almost looks worse at f2.8 I think that's just because we have this bright star in there now. But you can see it doesn't improve much at f2.8. The Canon actually looks pretty good here. There's a bit of chromatic aberration, but it's fairly sharp, even wide open. And the Sigma 105 improved quite a bit from f2. There's f2 and there's f2.8. So it's getting better, but it's still the softest of the four. And that's expected because it's also the widest of the four, so that's not a big deal. Okay, and then f3.2, these three are starting to equalize, but the Rokinon still has sort of that little bit of comet shape to it. And the Canon doesn't look too much better than wide open, just a little bit sharper. Not a huge difference with any of these, actually. Okay, but then at f4, the Rokinon really starts catching up and looks about as good as the Sigma 200, and the Sigma 105 is catching up quite a bit too. That's quite a bit sharper than at f3.2. And the Canon 200 millimeter probably is actually the most consistent. It is sharper at f4, but it's still a little bit aberrant. So hopefully that painted a picture. Really, the Sigma 200 millimeter f2 is far in the lead here with corner performance, but once you stop down to f4, these other lenses have caught up quite a bit. Okay, so we've seen that this lens is impressive optically, but let's talk a little bit about the mechanical design as it relates to astrophotography. The included lens collar is very, very nice. It has a nice long Arca Swiss foot here, and the collar allows you to easily rotate the camera and lens. It's very smooth. It has a few little hard stops at 90-degree angles. The foot also has a 1/4-inch screw hole for attaching this to a Vixen plate, as I have done here. The dew shield is really good quality. It has baffles on the inside. It's a black mat on the inside. It's nice and long. It's great for protecting the lens from stray light. It works great. The weight of the lens is 1.8 kilograms or 4 pounds. I used it on the Skywatcher Star Adventure GTI you're seeing here successfully, and it would really work fine on most star trackers or mounts. There are two downsides to this lens for astrophotography, and they're fairly big ones, and they're connected. The first is it's only available for L mount and Sony E mount, which limits your camera choices and also means the only kinds of astrophotography filters you can use probably are going to be clip-in filters that go into the camera body. The front lens diameter for filter threads is 105 millimeters, and there are no serious astrophotography filters available in that format. The nice thing with the EF mount is it's easy to adapt almost any camera you want, including astronomy cameras. Another reason it's easy to adapt most EF mount lenses is typically their manual focus system is completely mechanically coupled, meaning when you move the focus ring, it's actually moving the lens elements directly to focus. You don't need any electronic communication with the camera if you have a mechanical focus. While almost all new high-end lenses coming out today, including this one, use focus by wire, meaning when you move this focus ring, if it's sending an electronic command to the camera, then the camera sends an electronic command back to the lens about how to move the lens elements. If the camera isn't on or it's a camera that doesn't work with this lens and there's no electronic communication, the manual focus simply won't work. So this means you can't use this lens with a dedicated astronomy camera because there is no electronic adapter available, and I wouldn't think there ever will be one. Since there's so little backspacing available on these lenses compared to old DSLR lenses. Like EF lenses, for example, give you 44 millimeters to work with. L mount, it's only 20 millimeters, and E mount, it's only 18 millimeters. Okay, so who is this lens for in terms of astrophotography? Well, it's definitely an expensive lens, but it's also a unique lens. I don't think there is anything on the market that is this well corrected with a high megapixel full frame sensor at 200 millimeter f2. You can look at well-corrected small telescopes like the ASCAR SQA55 that's close to 200 millimeters, but that's over 2 stops slower at f4.8. So while this lens isn't designed with astrophotographers in mind, I do think it fills a gap for a very fast, very well-corrected lens that gives you this field of view on full frame, but is still plenty sharp with the stars and details. And so if you're looking for something like this, well, now you know it exists. And here is my final stacked and processed photo taken with the lens and camera. I took this on my first night out with the lens. I took it from Cherry Springs State Park in Pennsylvania, which is a dark sky park. And it's about Bortle 3. And this is centered on the Dark Shark Nebula in Cepheus, but it has some other dark nebulae friends in here as well. For just a couple hours of integration, I'm super impressed with this lens and camera combination and what it could do, and I'm really glad that I got to review it. Well, that's it for this one. Till next time, this has been Nico Carver, Clear Skies.